you can gain a lot of listeners, but the ones that you got are your mouthpiece. They are the ones who become your advocates, your brand advocates. They the ones who become your walking advertisement. Because if you are putting together a show, an episode that is remarkable, that is packed full of undeniable value, they gonna tell somebody.
Welcome to the Social Mojo Podcast, the place where entrepreneurs and creatives come to discover the secrets behind building a powerful, engaging brand without spending a fortune. Let's meet the host, Mr. Anthony Porter, your guide on this journey to harness the power of organic social media. In each episode, we dive deep into the strategies that work, sharing insights, actionable tips, and success stories from experts and trailblazers who've done it all. From planning your content with precision, growing your audience authentically, to monetizing your passion effectively, we've got you covered. So, whether you're just starting out or looking to elevate your social media game, stay tuned. Because here at the Social Mojo Podcast, we're all about making your brand unforgettable, organically.
All right, everyone, it's day 5. We are back in the building. I got a question. Now, or should I say, it's a statement question, all right? So, is it true that everyone who's doing a podcast wants to get more listeners? You can answer that question. Is straightforward, is straight down the middle. I want to know, are you wanting to get more listeners? Now, I was in that situation one day. I wanted to get more listeners. But the biggest thing was, as far as getting more listeners, I had to think about something. Did I think about the ones who are already listening? Have I thought about the ones who are already listening? So, for those who want to get more listeners, say you got a couple hundred listeners who listen to your podcast on a regular basis. Ask yourself, have you thought about the ones who are already listening? And then ask yourself, are they actually sticking around? See, that question right there is about as broad to narrow as it could get. Because you gotta realize, you can have all the listeners in the world. You could want all the listeners in the world. But are they sticking around? See, when we jump into dealing with the podcast success, retention is key. And this is skill of 2. The skill 2 of 4 that is required to achieve that podcast success, that retention. Retention. See, we did the podcast ladder, and we went through the steps with the podcast ladder. But this is retention. See, keeping the listeners that you got is about as simple as it can get. You have to understand, you can gain a lot of listeners, but the ones that you got are your mouthpiece. They are the ones who become your advocates, your brand advocates. They the ones who become your walking advertisement. Because if you are putting together a show, an episode that is remarkable, that is packed full of undeniable value, they gonna tell somebody, or they gonna tell somebody. So just you have to think about this. Gaining more listeners versus keeping the ones that you got. Because again, these listeners that you already have are the ones who can help you in the beginning become very successful with your show. Now, how do you keep your listeners is another question that has to be asked. Well, we got to look at the analytics. See, when you talk analytics, most people automatically assume we're talking downloads. We're not talking downloads. There's another metric that makes a healthy podcast. There's another metric that actually is more important to the health of your podcast. And that's the average completion rate. Many podcasters who never look at the average completion rate are stumped as to why the show is not growing. I mean, you got to look at your completion rate. This is until they're stumped because they just don't take the time to check. Everybody's checking the metrics for downloads, but you're not looking at the completion rate. When you finally do check out your completion rate, when you finally take a look, you see that there's actually a growth problem. And their problem is retention, because most of the people are just not completing the podcast. Like, they listen, and somewhere down the line, they disappear. If you don't have a good completion rate, things happen. Well, here's one of the main things. Listeners tune into your show for the first time, and with the 5 minutes of press and play, you lose their attention. Completion rate is gone. And without a doubt, no one is going to sit through the next 30 minutes listening to your show. So you got to be able to hook them the first 3 to 5 minutes, preferably 3. And then if you ain't hooked them, if you don't hook them, they'll turn your podcast off and never return. But the good news is that can be fixed. Oh, that definitely can be fixed. When you change the focus of keeping your listeners, oftentimes your download numbers will go up without changing your growth strategy. Now, if you focused on the people that you already have, your numbers will go up. And I wonder why. Did I just say that back in a few minutes ago that people will become your mouthpiece, your brand advocates? So by learning how to keep your listeners, by keeping their attention, it's not cliche, but what it is you have to understand, you cannot fill a wicker basket with water. So you basically have to learn how to keep their attention. You convert your podcast from a wicker basket to a steel bucket, and things is going to work out perfectly for you. And once you turn that wicker basket into a bucket that is made of steel, guess what happens? The water that's sitting at the bottom starts to rise. And when that water starts to rise, guess what? That's the growth. So once you start paying attention to who you already have, then you will understand, and you will see, once you start looking at your completion rate, that the water itself, your podcast, which is the water itself will eventually grow. That bucket becomes a retainer. Remember, we're talking about retention. That bucket becomes a retainer. Your podcast becomes the retainer. It starts to retain your listeners. It starts to get them to tune in and home in and harness the information, the value that you're giving them. And once you start giving them this value and they stick around, they start becoming the person that will talk to somebody else for you. And then now they are your brand advocates. They are speaking about you, for you, to other people. So how do you check your retention rates? Many podcasters have no idea how and where to look for I'll say retention. It's really completion rates. They never know where to look for these completion rates. Sometimes these rates are not given by the podcast host. They're not. Like, so I use Red Circle. Now, Red Circle gives me metrics, but I think for me to check my completion rate, which I plan on doing, it's upgrading my plan. And my plan is outstanding right now. So shout out to Red Circle. But your host actually doesn't know how much of an episode that your listeners are listening to. So how do you check this? So there's a company that does have this information. The app that your listeners use to listen more than likely has this information for you. See, most people use Apple Podcasts. Some people use Spotify. So that's where most of the check completion rates, Apple Podcast Connect, and Spotify for podcasters. That's where you're going to find most of your completion rates. So your host is not going to do it. You got to go into, like, see, with me, Red Circle distributes this is my hosting platform. So they distribute my podcast across all podcast platforms. And then I have some more that I've signed up for. But they distribute for most of my 5 or 6. So once you get there, you'll be able to see the completion rate. So you got to check wherever you upload to. So just think about this. Most hosts allow you to go in. And even, here's what I like about Red Circle. Red Circle will send your stuff, but you still have to go in and you still have to set up everything. So you can still go in and see where mostly everything is coming from. You have to set it up. So by setting it up, you automatically go in, check things, see where your completion rates are, see where your stats, your metrics. See, Red Circle gives me my metrics, but it doesn't give me completion rates. So what's a good completion rate? I know you want to know that. A good completion rate depends on two things. Your podcast format. Interviews usually have a lower completion rate than solo. So again, we talked about this in formatting the last episode. And then your average episode length. Shorter episodes equal higher retention. Depending on how you want to do things, 45 minutes, you ain't gonna have a high retention completion rate. It's a long podcast. Somewhere in between 15 to 20, you'll be doing great. They said that a completion rate recommended podcasters shoot for 70% plus. Anything lower than that, well, your listeners are going out there, or they're going out of their way to stop listening to your podcast. And man, trust me, that ain't good at all. So if you have managed, or you get the opportunity to go in there and you come across and manage your access to your completion rates, and you find that they're low, what is it that you can do to fix that? Well, the quickest way to fix low completion rates is this. 9 times out of 10, low completion rates is due to bad episode intros. That's true. A listener has 3 to 5 seconds to basically form an opinion. So they're listening. If you don't have nothing that catches their attention and makes them want to listen to something, you've already shot yourself in the foot. So you must sell the listener on why this episode is going to be great. You got to sell them. Why is this episode going to be great? No ads, no call to actions, no rate, no reviews, not even a visit my website, follow me on social, none of that. No, talk about the weather, none of that. No, give them exactly what they want. Give them, don't even tell them it's a pre-recorded show. Give them what they want. Tell them exactly what this episode is going to be about. And once you tell them what this episode is going to be about, guess what? They got the opportunity to decide whether they want to stick around or whether they want to go. When they are listening, it should be your voice that they hear. Setting the stage, hyping up the episode that they're about to hear. All right. So with me, I like to give you a snippet of what is inside of a podcast here at the Social Mojo Podcast. I can't give you nothing else. I'm not going to sit here and give you the boring intro. This is what you're going to get with me. You're going to get the information to start it out. So think about this. Have you ever heard of Nate Palmer? It's the Low Crab Hustle with Nate Palmer. So I think he was averaging 12,000 downloads per month, which is great, right? And I was reading this because this is a case study. I was reading this, and even though Nate was doing tons of marketing activities to promote the show, he was stuck. No matter what new promo tactic he tried, he simply could not get his download numbers to go up. He's averaging 12,000. And again, this was a case study that I came across. I don't know Nate. I didn't work with Nate. This was a case study that was presented. I fell in love with the case study. His low retention rate was because his show was stagnated. Nate's show intro was the cause of his completion rates being low. So when you was listening to, when the show was being dubbed out, it really wasn't doing what everybody was expecting. So basically what was happening is there was nothing that was catching anybody's attention. So with nothing catching anybody's attention, that completion rate looked poor. That's what it looked like. The slope, the show just took a dive. All right. Now, once everything changed and he explained why they should be listening to his show, where they could be listening to, everything turned around. Rates went up. It was simple. The intros was terrible. Once they fixed it, once he got with a mentor and his intro was fixed, and he was basically giving the apple seeds, the applesauce, he was giving it to you in the beginning. The episodes turned around. Within seconds, people was paying attention. They understood what they was there for. And once they understood what they was there for, everything went up. All because he changed his intro. You have to grab their interest in the first few minutes, man. Period. You have to grab their interest in the first few minutes. You got 90 seconds. Hook, story, offer. No matter what it is, Russell Brunson taught me that. Hook, story, offer. Whether it's your podcast, whether it's your sales funnel, whether it's your book, you got to hook them in. Got to give them the story. Then you hit them with an offer. And that's how this thing goes. Because if you don't, they're going to go find another podcast and your completion rate's going to stay low and your competitors is going to go high. And once your competitors' podcast completion rate goes high, you'll be disappointed and you'll want to just fire everybody and move on to the next thing, which is not a good thing. So at this point, here's what you need to do. You need to make sure that you follow the podcast ladder we talked about in the first few days, because the first few days was packed full of great information, right? So you want to make sure that you follow the podcast ladder, and then you have to go in and you have to. So here's what you need to do. You really need to sit back and listen to your own podcast. Don't ask nobody else, because that most of the time your friends are gonna tell you, "This is great." They be lying their ass off. Stop going to people that you know. Let's do that. Stop going to people that you know. Be your own critique. Critique your own work. Be your own critic. All right? Listen to your stuff and understand it's simple. And if you don't critique your own work, hire somebody to do it. And once they get to that point where everything is, the audit has been given, then the results shall change. So now that you know that, work on your intro. Remember, we talked about that leading into this. Your format, however you format your show, you should have an intro that depicts to your listener. Draw them in. And then make sure you tell them in the beginning, hey, this is what we're going to discuss today. But don't be so drug out. Don't be so, this is what we're discussing today. Nah. However you do your show, however you do your episodes, make sure that you have some type of enthusiasm. And once you figure out that you have the enthusiasm, then guess what? You're good to go. So the numbers shall go up, because what happened was within 90 days after Nate got his episode, his intro taken care of, he went from 12,000 to 20,000 downloads per month for his podcast. The listeners have stuck around, and once the podcast episode got fixed, the show started to grow. So after the intro was fixed, he already had mastered level 3, but of the podcast, ladder, the growth. It was all about, fixing that intro that helped him get to the next level. All right. So Nate was killing it on social media, being featured on all kind of shows. And he was even running some paid ads. Blew up. Again, this was a case study. I don't know Nate personally. I just know this was a case study. Caught my attention, caught my eye. So we now know that his show wasn't growing because he wasn't stuck in level 2. It was the retention. Now, once everything got fixed, level 2, Nate blew up, passed to level 3. He got ready to go on to the next level, which is level 4. which is monetization. And it's rare, however, to have level 3 so well developed, but it got done. And the retention immediately 3x his show in 90 days. And that's what you want to do, man. You want to be able to do that. So I'm going to tell y'all something. There's still work that needed to be done. And you have to understand there's always work. Never get stagnated and be stuck and say, I'm doing this, I'm good. No, you're not. Always work, because you have to work to implement this. You have to work to get the right growth strategy. And we'll cover that when we get to level 3 of the podcast success ladder. Because this is, remember, the ladder started, we're in level 2, which is retention. All right. So we're going to cover that in level 3. But we're not ready to move on from level 2 yet. So because there's more that needs to be done in keeping the listeners than having the podcast with a great intro, the rest of the episodes need to be great too. So we're going to dig into that tomorrow. And I'm going to see y'all tomorrow, man. It's your man, Anthony Porter, Social Mojo Podcast. I holla.
And that wraps up another episode of the Social Mojo Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in and spending your time with us today. We hope you found our conversation insightful and engaging. Don't forget to subscribe to the Social Mojo Podcast on your favorite platform, and be sure to download the episodes so you never miss out on our latest content. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us continue bringing you great discussions every week. A special thank you to our incredible executive producers, Sincere and Charlie Straughter, Rhea Cash, and Theory Porter. Your vision and dedication make this podcast possible. Remember, the Social Mojo Podcast is a proud part of the Amplified Pod Academy, where we strive to amplify voices and share stories that matter. Until next time, stay connected and keep the mojo flowing. Bye.